right, safety pros out there. Um, nobody really loves paperwork, but when it comes to OSHA, you really got to have the right records, right? It could be a real make or break situation sometimes. And, today's deep dive is brought to you by Safety One Source. They're a great resource to help you stay ahead of the curve. And what we're going to be looking at today is unpacking these OSHA record requests. It can be kind of confusing. So we're going to, help everyone be prepared.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. It's a big deal when a government representative shows up and they want to see some very particular safety records. And, they're usually in a hurry.
Okay, so to set the stage for everyone, today we're looking at a couple of key sources. We've got information straight from OSHA's website, and then we've also got a really helpful breakdown from Safety One Source. And, both of them highlight this thing called the 4-hour rule, which honestly sounds kind of scary, right? Like it's something right out of a thriller movie.
Yeah, it can definitely feel a little bit like that, but, don't worry. We're going to unpack everything and break it down so that you can stay calm and compliant. And I think the best place to start is to look at, what actually triggers this rule, right? So it applies when a representative requests records that you keep under OSHA Part 1904, which deals with recording and reporting workplace injuries and illnesses.
Okay, so they're digging into your safety record, and they're going to be asking for these Part 1904 documents. So what kind of documents are we talking about?
Well, think about things like your OSHA 300 log, where you're tracking all the workplace injuries and illnesses, right? Or your 301 incident reports, which are giving more detailed info about specific incidents. So basically, anything related to documenting workplace safety is going to fall under that umbrella.
So it's not just, random paperwork. It's very specific documentation related to workplace safety incidents.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Okay, so then who exactly are these representatives who have the authority to request these records? Who are these people?
So OSHA actually outlines 3 specific types of representatives who can make these requests. So first up, you've got representatives of the Secretary of Labor, and these are usually OSHA inspectors or investigators who are conducting, an inspection or an investigation under the Occupational Safety and Health Act.
Okay, so if OSHA is investigating a complaint or, conducting a routine inspection, they have the right to request these records.
Yeah.
Got it. What about the other 2 types?
All right, so next you've got representatives of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and this can include researchers from NEOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and they might be investigating, a specific hazard or pattern of injuries in, a specific industry or something.
So it's not always about, enforcement or finding fault. Sometimes it's also about research and, understanding workplace safety issues more broadly.
Precisely, yeah. And then the third type of representative is going to come from state agencies that are managing those OSHA-approved state plans.
Ah, right, because some states have their own OSHA programs. So it might not be a federal OSHA person. It might be someone from the state agency, right?
Exactly, yep. So we've got the Part 1904 records and the 3 types of authorized representatives. So now let's talk about that 4-hour deadline, because that's where things can get a little bit dicey.
4 hours is not a lot of time. I mean, imagine you have to locate and gather and copy all of these records in the middle of a busy workday.
Yeah.
That's got to be stressful, even for someone who's very organized and on top of things.
Yeah, it definitely can be. And the regulation doesn't really give you a lot of wiggle room. It very clearly states that copies of those records must be provided within 4 business hours of the request.
Wow, no pressure. So let's say like an OSHA inspector walks in at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning and requests your 300 logs for the past 3 years. That means you've got till 2 p.m. that same day to produce them.
You got it. And that's where, those best practices that we talk about all the time really come into play. Things like having a point person, a very clear procedure for handling these requests, and a super organized record-keeping system that's easily accessible.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. But wait a minute, did you say something about time zones?
You're right. That is a really important detail that people often forget about. So OSHA is very specific that the 4-hour deadline is based on the business hours of the establishment where the records are actually kept. So, think about a company whose headquarters are in New York, but they've got a manufacturing facility in California that's getting inspected.
Okay, so multiple time zones, offices all across the country.
Mm-hmm.
How does that make things more complicated?
Well, imagine that facility in California gets a records request at 2 Geary p.m. their time. Well, that's 5:0 p.m. in New York, where the main safety records are kept.
Oh, wow. So even though they've got 4 hours in California, the office that's responsible for those records might already be closed for the day.
Exactly. And that's, that could lead to non-compliance. So understanding the local time zone where those records are kept is super duper critical.
It seems like companies with operations in a lot of different time zones really have to think this through and make sure they have a really good plan.
Absolutely. You need to have clear lines of communication, people designated in each location who know exactly what to do, and maybe even a system to transfer those records electronically if you're really in a time crunch.
This is all starting to sound pretty complicated, like a lot for safety professionals to keep track of.
It can be, but remember, Safety One Source is here to help, and they have tons of resources to help guide you through all of this stuff, from, creating a record-keeping system that's compliant to developing procedures to handle these requests really quickly and efficiently.
So having those resources and, some expert guidance can make a big difference in staying compliant and avoiding those last-minute scrambles.
Absolutely. Being prepared and knowing the rules of the game can really make this whole OSHA record request process a lot less scary.
So we've covered the what, the who, and the when of these requests, but what about the how? Like, how do you actually provide these records? Do they want paper copies or electronic or what?
Oh, that's a great question, and we'll get into all those details right after a quick word from our sponsor, Safety One Source.
Okay, so we were talking about how to actually give these records over to the OSHA representative, and I'm assuming there's a decent amount of flexibility in how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. OSHA is actually pretty reasonable when it comes to the format and the delivery methods. They totally get that we're not living in a paper-only world anymore.
That is good to hear. So what are our options then?
Well, of course, they'll take paper copies if that's what you have, but they're also totally fine with electronic copies like PDFs or scanned documents or even data pulled straight from a digital record-keeping system if you're using one.
Okay, that makes it much easier for those of us who, have gone digital. It's definitely a lot faster and easier than going through filing cabinets.
Exactly. And even in terms of actually delivering the records, there's flexibility there too. So you can hand deliver them straight to the representative. You can send them by mail. You can even send them electronically if the representative agrees.
It really sounds like OSHA is trying to make this as smooth as possible.
Yeah.
While still obviously getting the information they need.
Yeah, they get that different businesses have different systems and resources. So they're trying to offer a bunch of different ways to comply, but ultimately, the responsibility for providing those records within that 4-hour window is still on the employer.
Right. No pressure. But seriously, this just kind of highlights how important it is to plan ahead and be prepared. You don't want to be caught off guard when they show up at your door.
No, you really don't. You need to have a plan, know where your records are, have a system for getting to them quickly. That's all super critical for being ready for an OSHA record request.
And it's not just about meeting that deadline either, right? It's also about kind of setting a message that your company is serious about safety and transparency.
That's a great point. Yeah, when you can just hand over those records, it shows OSHA, but also your employees and, even potential clients or partners that you're not messing around. You take this stuff seriously.
It builds trust and credibility, right? Shows you're really invested in a safe work environment.
Exactly. So, okay, before we wrap up, let's maybe switch gears a bit and talk about how to really stay ahead of the curve here. So, what are some things safety professionals can do to be extra prepared for a potential OSHA record request?
Yeah, it's one thing to know the rules, but how do we put that into practice? Where do we even begin?
Okay, so I think the first thing is to just do a really thorough audit of your current record-keeping practices, like go back to OSHA's Part 1904 requirements, and just make sure you're keeping all the right records in a way that makes sense for your company.
So double check those 300 logs, the 301 reports, make sure everything's up to date and accurate and easy to find.
Yep, exactly. And then think about who's going to be in charge of handling those OSHA requests. Have a point person or a team so everyone knows who to go to if an inspector shows up.
Yeah, having that designated expert can make things way more efficient. What else?
Training. Anyone who might be involved in this needs to understand that 4-hour rule, who the different representatives are, what your company's procedures are, the whole 9 yards.
So they can handle things confidently and efficiently, makes sense. And then what about the records themselves? Any tips for keeping them organized?
Oh, for sure. You really need a good system for storing and retrieving all of that, whether it's physical files or an electronic database. It has to be organized, user-friendly, and ready to go.
Okay, so think worst case scenario, right? Where are they kept? Who has access? How quickly can you find what you need?
Exactly. That's what separates the companies that really excel at this stuff. They turn a potential disaster into a smooth process.
So a lot of it comes down to having a really proactive and organized approach to safety overall.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not just about complying with OSHA. It's about creating a culture where you're transparent and accountable, and that benefits everyone.
Right. And speaking of resources, the Safety One Source is all about helping companies figure this stuff out. They're a great resource for safety professionals.
They are. They've got all sorts of tools and templates and training resources to help companies build and keep good safety programs.
So if you're feeling lost or just want to, make sure you're doing things right, definitely check them out. They can help.
100%. They want to help you create a workplace that's safer and healthier, and that's better for everyone.
It's a win-win. So before we wrap up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to really take away from this?
I think the main thing is it's all about being ready. You got to have your systems in place and the rules and you're ready to just jump into action when you need to. It's not about, hiding stuff. It's about showing that you're really committed to a safe workplace.
Right. And that kind of proactive approach benefits everybody in the end, right? OSHA, the company, and especially the employees, it shows that you care about them. And, their safety is important.
Absolutely. So to all the safety pros out there listening, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by this whole 4-hour rule and everything we talked about, just remember you're not alone. There are resources out there.
Yeah, and that's where Safety One Source is really great. They have a ton of information and tools and training that's all specifically designed for safety professionals.
Yeah, they can help you understand all those little details in the OSHA regulations. Develop a good system for keeping records and even train your team so everybody's ready if something happens.
So if you're feeling lost or just want to stay on top of things, definitely reach out to Safety One Source. They have the experience and all the resources to help make your workplace safer and healthier.
They're really all about empowering safety professionals like you to make a difference.
All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive, we hope this has given you some good info and insights to tackle these OSHA record requests and feel confident.
Remember, being prepared is the key. And with the right resources and that proactive mindset, you can handle anything and create a workplace where safety comes first.
A big thank you to Safety One Source for sponsoring this episode and for everything they do to support safety professionals.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Stay safe and keep those records organized.
Until next time, happy safetying.